Should you be using LATS to release the traps? Oh, by the way, traps spelt with a Z. Traps. Let's find out. The argument here is that through reciprocal inhibition, if you fire up your lats, then you reciprocally inhibit your traps and get your upper traps to release. Everybody blames the upper traps for being the bad guy in neck and shoulder dysfunction. Let's find out if that's true, and let's break down this ridiculous post in today's episode. Hey, real quick, this is Anthony Davis with Shapeshift Wellness, where we explore the science of, and I do mean science and research about fitness, yoga, and meditation. If you like that sort of thing and you want to know more about the shoulder and you want to take a step-by-step in learning shoulder anatomy, I just released a shoulder anatomy course. That's why I'm making a bunch of videos about the shoulder. So find the link in the description for that. Now let's check out this shoulder myth today. Okay, so first, let me start off by being charitable to this notion that this individual is, dealing out or peddling in this video. So this person, the shoulder guy, oh, great post by, okay, so it's not even his post. He's sharing a post that he probably doesn't even understand. So the lats release the traps with a Z using reciprocal inhibition, and basically he's suggesting that by firing up your lats, which are this yellow highlighted muscle here, that you're pulling the shoulder down, and that's going to inhibit these upper trap muscles. So let's actually watch this video because it's kind of cool and it makes a compelling argument. Okay, so this muscle pulls the shoulder down. So if I fire the muscle that pulls the shoulder down, then I'm stretching my upper traps, which are up here, and that's going to get my upper trapezius muscles to relax. Because there's this mechanism in physiology that we describe. I don't know why we're still learning about this because it doesn't really exist. But it's called reciprocal inhibition. So as soon as people learn about this idea of reciprocal inhibition, people get all jazzed up about it, and then they get obsessed with a style of PNF stretching where you contract the opposing muscle group to the muscle you're trying to stretch. So if you're trying to stretch the upper trap, you contract the lat. Let me give you a simple example though. Let's say you were trying to stretch your hamstrings, then the idea would be, oh, well, let's squeeze our quads, because if I squeeze my quads, that's going to straighten the knee even more, and that's going to stretch the hamstrings. So if I squeeze the idea is that I cannot squeeze the hamstrings and the quads at the same time. So if I squeeze the quads, then the hamstrings have to relax. That's the idea. That's what reciprocal inhibition, if it was a real thing, which it's not, but if it was, that's what would happen. So if that was a real thing, then this whole post would make a lot of sense. But the post then goes on to basically take a dunk on people who use shoulder shrugs and trapezius strengthening exercises in order to get those muscles to calm down. This is there's no evidence, there are no citations, there's absolutely nothing in here that actually suggests that this notion is based on evidence. So let's actually explore some research. All right, so first of all, let's start off with the idea that you can't strengthen a tight muscle. There's a debate among trainers and even among for physiotherapists and chiropractors and things like that, rehab specialists. There's a debate about if a muscle is quote unquote tight, should you inhibit it and stretch it essentially, or should you strengthen it? Well, let's explore. So this person is suggesting that it's just totally stupid. Hey, you're stupid. You're stupid if you strengthen a tight muscle. What are you, stupid? Well, let's check it out. So here's a cool article. So this is actually about hamstrings. Most of the research when it talks about flexibility is talking about flexibility of the hamstrings. So we're going to use this as a generalizable approach, but just realize that I'm talking about the hamstrings and not the upper traps. So it's not completely apples to apples, but it's a pretty fair comparison. So the principle is in this study was looking at, can we improve flexibility in the hamstrings with an eccentric strengthening exercise, compared that to static stretching, so passively stretching the hamstrings. And if the shoulder guy here was right about what they're saying here, then the eccentric training should actually result in a less flexible hamstring because you're firing that muscle up. But actually what they found was that the eccentric training resulted in a better flexibility of the hamstrings compared to passive stretching. So actually firing the muscle up and slowly lengthening it while it's under tension actually was a better strategy for improving flexibility of the hamstrings. So can you strengthen a tight muscle and improve flexibility at the same time? You definitely can do that. Okay, next, let's address the glaring, misunderstanding about basic human physiology. So the sliding filament theory is what explains how muscles actually contract and relax. So how a muscle contracts is you've got a bunch of fibrils overlapping, and then blah, 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 a bunch of chemical reactions occur, and they go like that. Okay. And then when they relax, they have to just slide like that. Now, what controls that process of lengthening is your nervous system and your supply of electrolytes and, calcium and ATP. So it's funny, you actually need energy. This is interesting. You might not know this. You actually need energy to relax a muscle. You need to create ATP, which is basically, let's call it fuel in your muscles. And it's that fuel that actually relaxes the muscle. So it's not what most people think. So the muscle could kind of just get used to chilling here. And if you don't use any fuel to intentionally relax it, then you'd be kind of, I don't want to say stuck, but you kind of would be like stuck where you are. Not necessarily the end of the world, but if you wanted to relax, you would actually have to use energy to relax the muscle. That's why eccentric training is such a great strategy. The other thing that they're missing is that this idea that pulling on the lats is going to magically increase the length of your upper traps is ridiculous, because that's not how muscles get tight. Muscles get tight sometimes because they're weak, sometimes because of degeneration and you lose sarcomeres. So here's an example, or you're sedentary and you don't use those muscles, and so they become weak as a result of sedentary behavior. So this article here is showing how, and you can get your full text article there. I just pulled this up so you could see which article I'm talking about and look it up for yourself if you want. But this article here, it was talking about how basically by having a sedentary lifestyle that can lead to degeneration of the muscles, but that includes a decrease in sarcomere. You lose sarcomeres at the end of the muscles, so you actually do reduce to some degree the length of the muscle. So then you would have to go through a process of strength training at length to increase sarcomerogenesis and add sarcomeres at length to the muscle fibers. So this is actually a structural thing where you have to physically work out that muscle in order to stimulate adaptation. So the idea that you're just going to pull on your lats and magically you're going to develop more sarcomeres here, that doesn't make any sense. So this person clearly doesn't understand basic human physiology when it comes to muscle physiology. In addition to not understanding muscle physiology, they don't understand physiology of the fascia, the connective tissues. So the extracellular matrix, the actual stiffness of your fascia will increase with age or with sedentary behavior. Basically, if you don't use it, you lose it, kind of like the last article that I showed you. But this one is just showing that the stiffness of the fascia is going to change as well, the extracellular matrix. And you can't just magically undo that with reciprocal inhibition and some neurological trick. This actually takes time, and time at length, and time of actually putting force into those muscles and fascia and connective tissue in order to stimulate adaptation. Adaptation takes weeks and months. You can't just fire up your lats, bro, and reciprocally inhibit it. That's ridiculous. And here's another article showing the same thing. This happens to be an example of a clinical presentation of how stiffness can get, sort of rampant and result in a clinical presentation. So absolutely physical things are going on that reciprocal inhibition cannot solve. So what was the quote here? LATS release traps. LATS release traps, bro. Nope. False. So if you want to actually understand, and now let's actually address the reciprocal inhibition, because I've told you a bunch of times that that's not true, and I don't make things up. I cite sources from academic journals. So here you go. This is a fantastic review article. If you really want to take a deep, if you don't really know what you're talking about, this one's kind of a hard one to understand because they're using a lot of jargon in the actual article. But if you do pull up this actual, the full text article, and if you can't find it, I can send you a copy if you email me. But this full text article is a huge review of like all the different types of stretching when it comes to PNF stretching, all the types of neurologically driven stretching, and they do a really good literature review, and they bring up lots of articles that, you know, and they explain why somebody might have thought this idea at one point, and then how the research evolved, and how, oh well, but then we learned that this, you know, is not necessarily the case. Now, interestingly, the idea of reciprocal inhibition is taught still in classrooms all over the place, and people still think it's a real thing. But look at this. As long ago as 1980, freaking 1980, and we knew all the way back in 1980 that reciprocal inhibition was not true. It's not a thing. And the way we figured that out was basically we were trying to stretch out the hamstrings. And so what I already explained is that if I were stretching my hamstrings and reciprocal inhibition was a real thing, then if I squeeze my quads, my hamstrings muscles should relax. They should be inhibited. People like to use analogies. They say, well, if I turn on the light switch on the quads, then it automatically turns off the light switch on the hamstrings. Not true. So what they found was that people who did a contract, relax, antagonist contract type of PNF stretching, that's a really specific type of stretching, but I just described what it is. You stretch your hamstrings and you fire up your quads. Well, what they actually figured out was, so they hooked up EMGs, which measure actual electrical activity in your muscles. And what they found was that a higher level of muscle activation was associated. So they actually found an increase in activation of the hamstrings muscles when you fired up the quads, which is the opposite of what you are trying to achieve if reciprocal inhibition was a real thing, which it's not, which we knew all the way back in freaking 1980. So I just realized that I highlighted the wrong sentence there on the abstract on that article I was just going over right here. So I pulled up the original article, and it's right here. And you can see, where is it? Right here. So essentially, the most EMG activity was in response to the crack stretch condition. So that meaning contract, relax, antagonist, contract. So we can see, so in other words, the most EMG activity happened when they did the contract, relax, antagonist, contract, which is basically you go into this position right here. They contract the hamstrings first, then they relax the hamstrings, and then they contract the opposite muscle group, which should induce reciprocal inhibition. They should see that when you fire up the quads, that the hamstrings relax, but they did not see that. They saw the opposite of that. In fact, they saw that this a co-contraction, is what they call it. So when you fire the quads, you co-contract with the hamstrings. So this all the way back in 1980. Here's the original article. All the way back in 1980, they blew this out of the water, and yet we're still talking about reciprocal inhibition, and we're still making claims like that the LATS release the TRAPZ. Bro, again, TRAPZ with a Z. This is why it's hard to get your scientific information from Instagram, from social media. And look at this. I just pulled up the original, the person who made the original post, Andrew Locke. Look at this, 51,000 followers. Doctor? Freaking doctor? And you didn't even bother to pull up some research and back up what you're saying. He's a physiotherapist, so presumably DD, I haven't seen that acronym, but presumably if he's a physiotherapist and he's a doctor, he's probably a doctor of physical therapy. So, I mean, clearly doesn't understand the research, clearly just making shit up, but people like that. People just bite on that stuff. Let's release the traps. Everybody else is a moron. No, read the research. So that's why we looked at this. We discovered today that strength training, here you go, strength training can improve flexibility of muscles that we're trying to target for flexibility. So you can absolutely strengthen tight muscles and it will improve their flexibility. We found that flexibility is not just controlled neurologically, but actual muscle adaptation and fascial adaptation, and again, fascial adaptation are all at play when muscles get tight, and that they take a long time to adapt, to readapt, to create stimulation in those tissues and make your DNA cause protein synthesis and lay down new tissue, or cause sarcomerogenesis and lay down new muscle fiber. Well, really just new sarcomeres. So we also found that the idea of reciprocal inhibition is BS, and here's a great review article if you want to check it out, and that the original research, when you actually tested out this, fire up the quads to release the hamstrings, that's the equivalent of this original post back here, which was to say fire up the lats to release the upper traps, that is totally untrue. And here's, we knew that all the way back in 1980, and yet today people are still making these posts, making these ridiculous claims. Not true. So that's enough of that. Thank you so much for watching. If you have questions, leave them in the comments. And hey, leave in the comments, what are some other ridiculous things that you hear people saying about anatomy or physiology, or questions? I'd love to break them down. Leave your questions in the comments and I can make videos responding to some of the things that people say on social media, just like I did today, where I'd love to take, if you see a post that says something, share it with me, and I will break it down in terms of the research. And then lastly, of course, if you want to learn more about the shoulder, I just released a shoulder anatomy course. Oh, hey, look, that's me. Cool. I'm on camera. Hey, look, Mom, I'm on camera. Anyway, I've just released a shoulder anatomy course. It's evidence-based. I cite my sources. We talk about step by step. What are the bones, joints, and motion of the shoulder? We start with the basics. We build on the fundamentals. You understand the foundations of the anatomy, and then we culminate the course with the idea of tensegrity and putting it all together and seeing how joints move in unison. So this is the course. Go sign up. There's a bunch of different ways that you can sign up. You can buy just the course, but I would, if I were you, get in the all access membership, because then you have that access not only to that, but to all of my educational courses. Here you go. Look, I got a bunch of courses. Anatomy ABC, shoulder anatomy, a guided class library, and a full functional movement anatomy course as well. So if you want to know more about human anatomy and motion as it pertains to yoga, exercise, fitness, whatever, go check it out. See you in the next video.